like your suit, Dr. McKenna.
Sabbath, you've worked together too long. We haven't worked together that long. When you both show up to work and you're both wearing a suit jacket and a black t-shirt.
Let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to hear from Dr. McKenna, CEO of Wild Leaders. He's a renowned expert in leadership development and celebrated for his groundbreaking work in fostering trust, driving performance, and connecting business strategy with the human side of leadership. Ranked among the top 30 most influential IO psychologists today, Dr. McKenna has over 2 decades of research and practical experience that position him as a thought leader in crafting sustainable, people-centered organizations. His innovative methods bridge the divide between strategic business goals and the emotional and relational needs of leaders, teams, and individuals, creating thriving cultures that deliver results.
One of the most powerful variables in terms of building trust and more importantly, trustworthiness is the extent to which that we are what some have described as differentiated. The extent to which that we are clear about who we are. We are settled in who we are. We speak that same clarity that we feel. And at the same time, we're connected in a seamless kind of way to what's going on in someone else. And today I want to talk about a part of that that is really important into what it means to be a differentiated presence. We've all been around a person, where it's clear that they're settled in who they are, but they also care. They have that, and for a person like that feels authentic. They feel trustworthy. So I want to dig into that. One specific part of that draws us away from that sometimes is the pressure we have to make progress. And so let me begin with this. The whole and trusted leader is both present in the moment and pushing progressively forward from that very same moment. They are here and now, and they are what is to come. I once heard it said that human beings are the only species on Earth that speeds up when we're lost. And I have no idea if that's actually true, but it sure sounds right in my own experience. The more off track, out of bounds, missing the point, or off the grid we feel, the faster we move, the less we stop, and the more we focus on the end goal as our primary directive. Moving fast and making progress sometimes gets a bad rap. We all know that. Progress and getting it done, it matters. It matters for all of us. We're wired for it. Progress, measurement, and personal and organizational achievement are a part of our created way. And it's not that progress is the great evil, but that it is so often, it overwhelms our capacity to be present in the moment. And it's not only our future orientation that gets in the way of our presence, it's also our past orientation that causes some of us to think so long about where we've been that we miss out on where we are. And everything in our world moves with the intention of the tortoise and the urgency of the hare. Our economic structures are built on the necessity for development and growth in our gross national product and increasing customer spending, while we all know that saving and pausing and just being is just as important as moving forward. And if you didn't know it, economics is most often thought of as a social science and not a business science. Our economies impact us socially and individually. And as I've had the chance to live alongside mentors who have moved into their 70s, 80s, and 90s even now, so often their challenge is one of being okay with slowing down. And while retirement is a cultural construction of a time when we stop working so hard at moving forward, it's not always that easy. And when we push all our lives, those deeply entrenched habits come face to face with the reality that we can no longer produce and grind the way we used to. And for many, there's also a realization that retirement from our careers doesn't mean a retirement from the reality that we have more to do, even if more to do may be less about us and more about our investment in the next generation. The point is that we struggle with being present at all phases of life and work and in many different ways. So let's talk a little bit more about being present. How deeply do you feel the necessity for being present with others? And I'm hard pressed to think of any leader or any person I've come in contact with over my lifetime who doesn't want to be more present in the moment. Being present is about living, breathing, thinking, and relating to others right now in real time. And living in a full send culture where half the messages go and go big time makes it really hard to come to a full stop and be present in the moment. And living a whole and intentional life requires us to live in the here and now while pushing forward with the necessary urgency. Being present in the moment while pushing for measurable progress is a fundamental and necessary paradox in our whole and real journey. And millions of books have been sold on the idea of being present. Another billion books have probably been sold on what it means to achieve and get it done. Far fewer books have been written about our reality that living in the present and being fully present is always in a healthy tension with moving forward. And to get it right, we've got to face these two competing expectations we have for ourselves and for others and figure out what it means to do both. And our responsibility for being present and progressing isn't likely our responsibility alone. It's something we do together. Like backseat drivers trying to control how someone else is driving the car, what if we were more aware of the ways we're getting in the way of others either progressing forward or being present in the moment? What if we were mindful of the pressure we put on others to be present or to make progress? What would change then? To make progress is to focus on urgency, motivation, goals, habits, measurement, grind, grit, owning it, and on getting there with efficiency. To be present is to be here and now, live in the moment, live in this moment, to slow down and even stop and to see what's happening. And progress matters because it gives us a sense of completion, of momentum, and a way to see and say, well done. In contrast, presence is the fundamental building block of our relationship to others. If we're not present, can we ever really see someone else? If there were a relationship 101 class that we would all take, half the content would probably be about being present with other people and not wandering physically or mentally away when we're with them. Being present isn't only necessary for relationships, but it's necessary for generating wisdom and discernment as we see what's really happening and not only where we're going. And the challenge is that most practical guides to leading and living and the research surrounding the two focus on one and not the other. And mindfulness and motivation are two examples. Most of the definition of mindfulness have to do with being present in the moment, being mindful and aware of what's happening around us right now, and that it's a practice that is shown to be correlated with some powerful things, including well-being, empathy, self-determination, intuition, job satisfaction, resilience, and even loosely with task performance. Slowing down long enough to be aware of what's happening in the moment is clearly important. Whether we call it meditation, prayer, cognitive reframing, coaching, or training, moments to stop and even pause are necessary. And at the same time, imagine all that has been written and studied about goal setting, effective habits, motivation, and the power of taking action and control. Research hasn't made it any easier for us to understand the paradoxical tension between making progress and being present. Most psychological research focuses on the power of one variable in impacting another variable, the interaction between two variables, or the additive power of one variable on top of another. So, our most common way of thinking about being present or progressing would be to look at the power of presence or progress on their own. to consider their multiplicative impact, or to see whether or not one on top of the other is the secret recipe. And as far as I know at this point in my life, we have no mathematical way to measure the paradoxical reality that presence and progress are both aspired realities that oftentimes compete with one another while both being necessary. I think you can probably relate to that, right? There is a tension between the two in our own experience every day of pushing and of pausing. And I didn't label them as both being good because they each can be used for good or for something not so good. And even further, while there is some evidence that some of us actually embrace competing tensions in our personality, the reality is that all of us wrestle between making progress and movement and being present in the moment. So, what's the goal? Is the goal to be present? Is the goal to make progress? Is the goal to see how they work together as an interaction? Or is the goal to embrace the tension and avoid our default tendency?
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
And I think some of the most interesting work that may help us navigate the paradox of progress and presence is the work of Albert Bandura. He's a Canadian psychologist. Bandura's social learning theory has the necessary complexity to at least begin our process of living now and pushing forward. Social learning theory is a powerful way to think about the determinants, the things that predict human behavior and learning. And Bandura describes that any change requires a shift in our thinking and our behaviors, as well as a deep understanding of the environmental factors that are impacting us. And from that perspective, understanding paradoxes, that means competing tensions, two things that are both true, but they compete with one another, understanding that, and the things we're doing that cause us to either be present or moving, that's important. And just as important are the environmental and organizational factors enacting our perceptions of what is appropriate to think and do. So, in other words, when we go to work, we're affected by that. And sometimes it causes us to be present and not make progress, or make progress and not be present. And at a cognitive level, this is what we think about. Accepting that paradox is a reality of our lives is the start. And that may sound easy, but we have few people encouraging us to live in that tension, and more who are either telling us to get going or to stop. And in practice, it's difficult for most of us to stop and be present and to go at the same time. How many times have you driven down a freeway 1,000 times without noticing much until the moment where the traffic stops? Suddenly you notice that grass is growing on the concrete median, or a farmhouse was built right alongside the freeway. Our action of stopping or going is probably one of the most fundamental predictors of us being present or making progress. From an organizational perspective, leaders, as the architects of culture, bear the responsibility for encouraging the norms that allow us to stop and see what's happening while being ready for moments where urgency, grit, and getting it done become important and primary. The movement from presence to progress often requires us to stop or to go within the same day or even within the same hour. And if our organizations encourage us to be ready to move forward and generate momentum while also being ready to pause and to see each other, what would that look like? And most of us probably have a default. That's probably the real true story. While some of us are doers, others of us are just really good at being present in the moment. And without intention, we will likely migrate to our default to either take action or to meditate, even in situations where others may need us to do something different than our compulsion. The challenge is that when someone points out our default, it doesn't always go well. If you don't believe me, just think of the last time someone said, "You just don't seem to like you You just don't seem like you're with me. Or have you ever heard that? Or where are you right now? And for those who default to being present, when was the last time you heard someone say, "Can you even make a decision?" Or "It would really help me if you took some initiative." Living well into the tension between presence and progress sometimes requires to identify those defaults, feel affirmed for the strength, and be willing to sacrifice ourselves or our ego for the sake of others' needs and maybe work on the other side. And as someone who has invested his life, my life, and career in the possibility that we could be both present more often and progressing on purpose, this is personal. I spent my entire adult life in the process of building tools for whole and intentional leader development, tools that cause us to stop, to pause, to see one another, to assess where we are, to see the team members we work with, to identify our competency and their competency, to see what's on their hearts and how what's on their hearts comes directly into contact with their capacity to perform. So interesting, right? That connection between that behavior and their thinking to make progress and to thrive in their work. These are tools that give you the moment to pause and become aware while also giving you measures of progress and actions to take. The fight we face against culture to help leaders and organizations do that is significant. To get a team to even take 60 minutes a month to pause and to see one another can be surprisingly difficult. But what would change in our capacity to not only grow our organizations, but to grow them well if we structured in those moments to pause as pit stops in our progress? The impact we have already seen is huge. And most personal and leader development solutions aren't systematic pauses that transcend the years, but are flavors of the month that are meant to help us feel good, but do little to actually change the fundamental cultures we're creating as leaders. A friend once asked me, "What is the number one reason that leaders fail to use the Wild Toolkit as their ongoing leader and people and trust building systems for the year after year?" And I said this, I said, "We struggle as human beings to pay attention and to be present long enough to make that longer lasting difference, even 60 minutes a month." But I went on to say that the difference we are seeing with the leaders and organizations we serve is profound. They're moving forward, sometimes really fast, but they're moving forward with intention and presence in the moment. So where do we begin? In terms of our thinking, never think of being present without consideration of the progress that is necessary. Call it what it is when we need it, and be open to the needs of others when they require something different. Practice moments of both. Knowing when we're present or progressing is the thinking part, and the behavior should follow. Organizationally, whether we're talking about a home or a business, set up a structure and make explicit statements about how we will work and be present while pushing for progress. In my own organization, we have an aspirational document called a culture charter. And my hope is that all in our organization would say it is real to who we are trying to be. Structure moments to stop and be present, to see one another and to see ourselves. Contract with others. Let them know now we are in neutral or park, or now we're in drive or reverse. Just like a car has explicit gears, calling out that both are realities and being intentional about whether we are stopping or moving is likely where it all begins. So I got a couple questions as we finish this. Questions you could use for a conversation. Are you in a season where it is more important for you to be present or to make progress? What would change if you saw both presence and progress as necessary for leading a whole and intentional life and building whole and sustaining trust? And what is one thing you can do to be more present, to make progress, or to somehow understand how they interact together for you personally?
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.